Okay, your guest is on the line.
All right. Hello, James.
Hi, Chris. You okay?
Yeah, yeah. You on a
Thank you.
speakerphone?
No, I'm not on the speakerphone. I got my headphones in.
Oh no, the good's kind of low like that. Would you be able to just speak directly to the phone?
Is that better?
Yeah, a little bit better. Like the headphone doesn't come through sometimes.
Okay, I'll take it off the headphones and put it on speaker then.
All right.
Is that better?
Yeah, a little bit better. How you doing, brother James?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Evening in the UK. 9:30 here.
Okay. How's jolly old England?
Do you know something? This week for sure, you can feel a hint of autumn in the air. Like the moment you get to the end of August, the temperature just you gradually starts changing.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, on the lines we have Mr. James Boston all the way from we in Birmingham. Birmingham, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, James.
Sure. So I'm James Boston. I'm a British Jamaican living in the UK. I'm the founder of the Association of Former British Colonies, which I'll talk a bit more about today. My areas of interest and passion are colonization and studying its impacts and its legacies around the world. That journey really starts with watching Roots for the first time and the kind of mental trauma that I think a lot of us go through when we watch movies that cover the transatlantic slave trade. I'm sure many people out there can relate, but for me, it really hit hard. It really hit home. But fortunately, it also had an impact where I felt inspired to try and learn about what was lost, and that led me on the journey that has resulted in some of the work that I'm involved in today.
Hmm. Yeah. So where did that lead you towards? What? Tell us about your association.
Sure. So since watching Roots at 16, the realization that we as African descended populations, essentially, living in the Caribbean, although live in the UK, but family in the Caribbean, there was a feeling of loss, feeling that aspects of our identity had been taken away from us. So I went on a journey to try and learn more about my African heritage. And at university, myself and some other Caribbean guys, we formed study groups where in the evening we would just learn, watch documentaries, and we wanted to learn what places were like in the world before colonization happened. And you find in places like Africa and even places like India, and people were living well. They had civilizations that were thriving, good economies, good education systems, real kind of advanced forms of knowledge. You see evidence of as well, and then you see this kind of similar pattern of European colonization. And if any of our listeners have ever seen the map, I'd advise you to Google the map of all of the European colonies. There's pretty much, the entire planet was colonized during this period of European colonization from the 1400s, onwards. There's hardly anywhere that wasn't impacted by it, either directly or indirectly. So you realize how much of an impact this has had on the world. And we talk about the USA. The USA is somewhere that's had a big. Britain has a big impact. I mean, there's a reason why they speak French over there and not a Native American language. Speak English over there, sorry, and not French or a Native American language, because Britain had a big involvement in the USA and the establishment of racist systems and structures that continue to exist in the USA today. So to fast forward. When we see the murder of George Floyd, I understood from my research and studying that I've done that you cannot separate modern day American racism from the fact that during the period of British rule in America, where they had the 13 colonies, the British were the ones who introduced the system of slavery and established it within their colonies. All 13 colonies practiced racialized slavery, all of them. And, the British, during their colonial administration of what became the USA, they passed legislation that clearly discriminated against persons of African descent and Native American persons. It clearly discriminated. So when you get to a point where the USA, eventually breaks away from the UK and becomes its own country, which law was adopted? Well, most states, which had formerly been colonies, adopted English common law, and at that time, English common law was very discriminative. So with this realization and seeing the global shockwave of the murder of George Floyd, I felt compelled to be like, something, I just need to get this knowledge out there. And that's really how the association started, is just wanting to get knowledge out there. So I created a social media platform, and I started interviewing people. I started interviewing professors. I started interviewing community stakeholders, people that had knowledge in the different aspects of British colonization, which was a focus area. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later on in this discussion. But for me, I'm a big advocate of reparations. And I know that reparations is sometimes associated with just money. And I want to clarify, reparations is not about a payoff for slavery or for colonization. Reparations is about repairing some of the damages and legacies that still continue to affect us as a global community of former British colonies and even British overseas territories to this day. The legacies of colonization are still with us.
Yes, thank you. So, as far as your association, who are some of the folks that you have interviewed so far?
So we have had the opportunity to work with some amazing individuals. So we've worked with persons from the United Nations who are involved in the reparations work. We've interviewed academics, from the University of West Indies across to the University of Delhi. We recently interviewed a lady from Malaysia who talked about the legacies of British colonization in Malaysia. We also hosted a few virtual events. So one of our events focused on reparations, and it was actually a reparations debate. The second event focused on food and how you can see legacies of British colonization through cuisine. And this is we try and take a global approach. So, again, I'd advise you to look at a map of all of the places that Britain has colonized, so you kind of understand that this is an international phenomena. Sometimes we tend to just focus on a certain region that, either our family are from or descend from, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's important to remember that, British Empire, influenced, Australia to the Caribbean, to Africa, to Asia, to North America. So it's important to kind of bear that in mind. So what we try and do is just interview as many different people with expertise around the world. And, we've interviewed people from South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Jamaica, India, Bangladesh, just a whole range of people. And, we're not even halfway through the amount of people that we could interview and the amount of countries that we can learn about. I'm still learning, so there's a lot to learn and a lot to understand about different communities' lived experiences of colonization, because it's not all the same, as much as there are patterns that you notice when you speak to people. So divide and conquer is a real pattern. You notice that, whether you're talking about Malaysia, India, the Caribbean, Africa, you see divide and conquer just manifested and played out in different ways. So yeah, there's so much to learn, but thankfully through the connections and, Chris, I know we've done an interview that people can see as well. It's really good. It kind of breaks down the history of Bermuda, the legacies of British colonization in Bermuda, and, we explore the future in terms of reparations and questions about independence, which seems to be an emerging theme amongst a lot of British overseas territories. From the conversations that we've had, there do seems to be a growing momentum for at least a discussion or conversation about independence. So we're learning all the time from the people that we interact with.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that we have history has been taught in silos, right? we've never been told the hero story. So us who are in Bermuda, we're told about Bermuda history, all right, and then world history, but we're never told about other countries that have been colonized. And you go to these other countries, whether they be in the Caribbean or in Africa or Asia, and it's a similar thing where the British, who were in control for so long, only taught people what they wanted them to know about that country, not about the rest. Because when you hear about the rest, you realize, oh, you did this to all these people all around the world. You all are some really I don't want to use certain words on the radio, but you all are really like up there, right? And what really kind of golded me this year was you have this celebration of the Golden Jubilee or whatever it is, Diamond Jubilee, whatever it is. And like, okay, people say, oh, the Queen. But you're saying, well, how did she become the Queen? What's the story behind this? And then when you look at the story behind it, not a pretty story. Like, you didn't get to be the queen of all these countries just because people just like your hats. You know what I mean? It's really a not too cool story behind it, right? What was something else I'm gonna say? What of the people that you've had a conversation with? What have people thus far learned from this?
I think people are learning. Many of the people that seem to gravitate towards our projects, and you can see us, you can find us on social media, on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. Many people seem to already have a kind of basic understanding of how their own countries or mother countries were colonized. But I think what hits people the most is when they learn about similar colonization taking place in the complete opposite part of the world, for example, and how another country was colonized. And in particular, I think for Caribbean people, and when I say Caribbean people, I'm speaking quite collectively here in terms of people of African descent, but then we also have people in the Caribbean of Indian descent and even Chinese descendants whose ancestors were bought by the British as indentured servants, as a kind of reinvented form of slavery that the British did post emancipation. And I think for a lot of Caribbean people, we want to know more about our ancestry in terms of, I'm noticing gradually more Indian Caribbeans want to know more about their Indian ancestry, where their ancestors would have come from in India and how they got to the Caribbean, for example. And also for a lot of African-descended Caribbean people, we want to know more about our heritage and connect with Africa. This seems to be an emerging thing that I'm seeing through this project in the youth, because it's an important part of identity. And if you look at the CARICOM Reparations Commission, who have a 10-point plan of what reparations look like, you can Google it, and actually you can see a document online where they go into a bit more detail about why each aspect of reparations is put in the plan. And one of them is around repatriation. Repatriation in the sense that, the Reparations Commission mostly focuses on African descendants. But, if African Caribbean children want the opportunity to go on a school trip to Africa, that should be a part of reparations. They're saying that European colonial governments should fund that. And, the rationale behind it is that not that it will solve an identity crisis, but it will assist, because, many of us, we know we have African heritage, but many of us, we've never had the opportunity to go to Africa and actually realize that you can go to Africa and see people that look quite similar to yourself, although because of our history in the Caribbean, our culture is not exactly the same as Africa. Many of us might be surprised that much more of our African heritage has survived that abhorrent, horrific Middle Passage and transatlantic slave trade and colonization in the Caribbean. There are aspects of our culture that have survived, of our African heritage that have survived, and it is very empowering to realize it has survived. So for me, I take great pride in speaking, Patois when I can, Jamaican Patois, because there are certain words which can be traced back to the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, or certain stories like any Jamaican listening, you know about Anansi. Well, Anansi, if you speak to somebody from Ghana, they know all about Anansi as well, So there are certain aspects of our culture which can be found in Africa, and many of us will also have indigenous Caribbean heritage as well, due to mixing that took place during slavery times. So, in terms of forming and building up a sense of pride in our identity, policies like this, if you will, around reparations can greatly assist with really just improving the void that many people might feel when it comes to knowing about their ancestry and history. And this is something that's outlined in the Reparations Commission. It's something that really resonates with me personally as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, because that's the thing, right? Is that when I was young, and even Brother Dawn, he was younger than me. In the mid-70s, we had this movie come out called Roots, and it was like I don't know, how many days, nights was it, Brother Dawn?
It was a series, so it went on for quite a while.
Right. So the Roots, the book, the adaptation from Alex Haley's book, showed how life was in the African village. Then when the slave people came and the Middle Passage, the plantation, and all this, right? That was the first real visualization that we had as black people around the world of what slavery was really about. But to your point, it also gave us a very small glimpse, however fictional it may have been, of what life was like in Africa before slavery. Because the images that we've been fed about Africa is that it's this war-torn country and it's disease and it's famine and it's everything bad, right? So we shouldn't think anything positive about Africa. And it's only in the last 15, 20 years that people who are of African descent have now been put in Afro-Caribbean or African American or Afro whatever as a prefix before the nationality. You know what I mean? So we've had this 400 years of being ashamed to be African.
That's right. But I think things are improving though, and this is one of the reasons, because when we talk about reparations, it's not just money. It brings back to what we're talking about now. It's kind of repairing that lost identity. And quite interesting, I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but I think that in the Spanish, the former Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, so your Puerto Rico, your Cuba, then your French, former French colonies like Haiti in particular, you can see a much more visible African presence in those countries, I think. Whereas the British, you have to perhaps dig a bit deeper for it. So there's a video I watched on YouTube, and it talks about how intertwined African words are into the Cuban version of Spanish that they have. It's very present. And in Puerto Rico as well, that it talked about how the indigenous people, because it's a myth that the indigenous Caribbean people were completely wiped out. They were victims of genocide, and a significant amount of their population was decimated, and there's nowhere near as many of them as was possible. But in Puerto Rico, I think there was a kind of DNA study that over 65% of modern day Puerto Ricans have indigenous heritage, and you look at the way they speak Spanish, they integrate many indigenous words, so much so that the University of West Indies have actually been able to compile a dictionary of the Taino language. And one of the ways they were able to do that was by taking vocabulary that Puerto Ricans have integrated into Spanish, where actually they're using indigenous words for things rather than Spanish words for things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, these are things, we've only just started scratching the surface on who we are, and it's important. You're never gonna have any one government that can do it all, and it's important that you have non-governmental organizations that are willing to take up the mantle and fill in or attempt to fill in the gaps on on these subject matters, because if the colonizers are not going to, those who colonize us are not going to tell us the truth. Maybe they themselves didn't even know the truth, and it's important for us to learn it from each other and continuously tell each other, right?
For sure.
So,
And you know something, right?
so we're gonna go to one last break, and then we come back and wrap up.
Need help with plumbing, heating, ventilation, or air conditioning? The BAC group of companies can help. Superior Service, top brands such as Kohler, Bradford White, and Pentair, Bermuda's biggest supplier of PVC pipe and fittings. We also offer solar and fire protection and engineering services. The BAC showroom is on Mills Creek Road, and our website is bac.bm. Our knowledge is vast, and whatever your needs, we can meet them.
Now back to Motion to Adjourn with MP Chris Famous and Dwayne Robinson.
Yes, brother James.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we got another 5 minutes, and we could wrap up and tell us what we could expect in the future with other persons from your organization.
For sure. So I definitely advise everybody to check out the AFBC content, and put forward any suggestions you have in terms of content that you would like to see, because we're at the grassroots stage, so we're still learning. We want to engage as many people as possible, but what you can expect to see is a lot more interviews with people from different former British colonies. I have a great team with me who are growing as well and learning more themselves as we continue this journey. And what the AFBC really is about is we want to establish a think tank, and the purpose behind the think tank is to use to work collaboratively with researchers to use the information and the educational content to inform policies around decolonization and reparations. And that's where we want to work, not just with governments, but with governments, with kind of key political change makers, grassroots organizations, community stakeholders, even that to anybody who wants to get involved and feel that they can assist, and can help us to influence public consciousness in a way that we can spread this important information. And I do want to emphasize that we want to be working with researchers, people who are uncovering groundbreaking information. Because all of this serves as an evidence base for reparations and for decolonization. I was speaking to a Jamaican reparations lawyer about this. The way in which the British established colonies is very interesting, because the persons in the colonies, whether they wanted to be or not, were actually considered British subjects. And therefore, as British subjects, Britain, who was essentially responsible for them, had a responsibility, to look after them. And therefore, if there is evidence that in a British colony that Britain even went as far to legislate actions and policies which discriminated against its colonial subjects, and actually some may go as far as CARICOM do to use terms such as crimes against humanity. If there's evidence that in a British colony, Britain committed crimes against humanity, and these were legislated, like the genocide of the native populations and the transatlantic slave trade. If this was legislated, then it strengthens the case for reparations and decolonization. And I think this is what you're seeing. This is why you're seeing Jamaica, Barbados, going that next step further and removing the Queen as head of state and increasing their calls for reparations. This is not going to go away. This calls for reparations has been referred to by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, the chairman, the vice chancellor of the University of West Indies. He referred and predicted that this will be the greatest social justice movement of the 21st century. So with that in mind, don't miss out and get involved if it's something that you feel passionately about.
Yeah, thanks for that. Because part of the problem for us as overseas territories, there are 14 overseas territories left in the world. 6 of which are in the Caribbean/North American region. So that's Bermuda, Turks and Caicos Island, Cayman Islands, Virgin Islands, Montserrat, and Anguilla. the challenge is that because we're still under the crown, we can't, as countries, we can't even sue the crown for reparations. You see the legality of it all. However, the independent countries can do so, and I know Sir Hillary was a guest on the show a couple of years back, and he had spoke of, you have to do things incrementally. You're not going to get this whopping big check of $1 trillion. I see Poland is now suing Germany for 1 trillion because of what Germany did to them during World War II. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But most importantly is for us to educate ourselves, us to communicate amongst each other, and for us to communicate to our people, because every revolution starts with a small amount of people and is given information, not just slanted information, giving valid information to others who are actually able to now say, hey, what James is saying is correct. They do owe us some money. We should learn about each other. We are really one people, So I applaud you and your association for the work that you all have been doing. And we're looking forward to hearing from some more of your members over the next couple months and years.
For sure. And you know what? I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on your platform and to hopefully touch the heart of our listeners. And just, because sometimes as a people we can get frustrated that, we learn this information and feel that there's nothing we can do about it. But I just want to remind you that there is something we can do about it. And it starts within. It starts with the power of your mind and your intention. And the more you cultivate that intention, the more it then begins to manifest as kind of physical actions where, you then start meeting the right people, forming networks. And then before you know it, with those networks, you are in a position where you can influence public consciousness and then start using that influence to shape decisions that are made. So never feel like there is nothing you can do, or feel frustrated that this is bigger than an individual. Never feel that way. That it all starts with the mind and your intentions, and it can go a very long way. And meet like-minded people, you'll be able to begin to manifest the type of change that we want to see.
Mm-hmm. All right, my brother. Well, we'll be talking, and Brother Dawn, thank you once again.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
All right, and to the people of Bermuda, we'll be back next week with some inspiring and informative news. Brother James, as they say in England, cheers, mate.
Cheers. Thank you.
All right.
And you have been listening to Motion to Adjourn with MP Chris Famous and Dwayne Robinson.
You're locked to Power 95, Bermuda's big station at 94.9 FM, a Bermuda Broadcasting Company station. Your station, the big station.